The training hall fell silent as Jasmine Rhodes locked eyes with Ryan Bennett across the tournament mat. 14 seconds. That's all it took to transform her from the cleaning lady to a legend. 14 seconds that erased months of humiliation, whispers, and sideways glances. 14 seconds that proved what she had known all along, that sometimes the greatest power lies in being underestimated. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and hit that subscribe button to join our community of truth seekers. The story you're about to hear might just change how you view the struggles happening around you every day. The Roxbury neighborhood of Boston isn't known for luxury apartments or picturesque views. It's a working-class area where people mind their business and keep to themselves. That's exactly why Jasmine Rhodes had chosen it. Her modest two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a weathered brick building on Tremont Street provided the anonymity she craved since leaving the Marines. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television through them, but she didn't mind. The background noise helped drown out the occasional nightmares that still haunted her from her time overseas. Every morning, Jasmine would wake before dawn, a habit ingrained from years of military discipline. She would brew a pot of strong black coffee in her small kitchen and sit by the window, watching the city slowly come to life as commuters headed to the subway station down the block. Her apartment was sparsely furnished, a second-hand couch, a wooden dining table with 2 chairs, and a bookshelf filled with medical textbooks and military history. The only personal touches were a framed photo of her father in his Marine dress blues and a shadow box containing his medals and the dog tags she now wore around her neck. After finishing her coffee, Jasmine would change into her work clothes and head to the Veterans Rehabilitation Center in Jamaica Plain, where she worked as a physical therapist. Her colleagues respected her quiet efficiency and the special connection she formed with the veterans under her care. They didn't know about her own military background. Jasmine never volunteered that information. To them, she was just a dedicated therapist who seemed to understand the unique challenges their patients faced. The center provided a sense of purpose that had been missing since her medical discharge from the Corps 4 years ago. Jasmine had served 8 years as a combat instructor, teaching Marines hand-to-hand combat techniques before a roadside bomb in Afghanistan left her with shrapnel in her right shoulder and a medical discharge she hadn't wanted. The physical wounds had healed, leaving only a jagged scar that she often touched when stressed, but the psychological ones ran deeper. Her marriage hadn't survived the transition to civilian life. Trevor, her ex-husband, had grown increasingly distant as her attempts to find her footing in the civilian world resulted in financial strain and frequent moves. "You need to let go of who you were and figure out who you are now," he'd said the night he left, his bags already packed by the door. Jasmine hadn't argued. Maybe he was right. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, around the same time Jasmine had first walked into Pinnacle Martial Arts Academy. She had always found comfort in physical discipline, and after treating several veterans who spoke highly of how martial arts had helped their recovery, she decided to give it a try. The academy was located in an upscale part of the city, housed in a renovated warehouse with state-of-the-art facilities and a clientele that reflected its premium membership fee. It was a financial stretch for Jasmine, but she justified the expense as an investment in her well-being. From the moment she stepped into Pinnacle, Jasmine felt the weight of being the only black face in the room. Students paused their conversations to glance her way, their eyes questioning her presence in this exclusive space. The sleek, minimalist lobby with its wall of trophies and framed photos featured not a single person who looked like her. But Jasmine was used to being the only one. It had been that way through much of her military career as well. The head instructor, Ryan Bennett, had made an impression from the start, and not a positive one. A former MMA fighter whose career had peaked at regional championships, Ryan carried himself with the inflated ego of someone who believed they deserved more recognition than they had received. His perfectly styled hair, expensive GI, and curated social media presence projected the image of martial arts royalty. He wore his black belt like a crown and expected newcomers to show appropriate deference. When Jasmine had inquired about classes, his eyes had swept over her with barely concealed dismissal. "We do have some women who train here," he'd said, as if granting a rare privilege. "But this isn't cardio kickboxing. It's intense training." The implication that she wouldn't be able to handle it hung in the air between them, along with the unspoken question of whether she could afford the membership. Jasmine had simply nodded, paid the registration fee, and signed up for beginners classes 3 times a week. For the first few months, Jasmine had kept to herself, arriving early to classes and leaving promptly afterward. She absorbed techniques like a sponge, applying the same methodical approach that had served her well in the military. While other newcomers struggled with basic movements, Jasmine's body seemed to intuitively understand the principles of leverage and balance. She never revealed her background, preferring to be underestimated rather than singled out. But it was impossible to completely hide her natural aptitude, and eventually, it caught the attention of both Ryan and the other students. The incident that would change everything hadn't come out of nowhere. It had been building for weeks, ever since Ryan had noticed her quietly correcting her partner's technique during a practice drill. "If you think you know better than me, Rhodes, maybe you should be teaching the class," he had commented loudly enough for everyone to hear. Jasmine had apologized and stepped back, but the damage was done. She had committed the unforgivable sin of questioning the hierarchy of the academy, and Ryan had been looking for an opportunity to put her in her place ever since. That opportunity presented itself during the advanced class that Jasmine had recently been permitted to join. Ryan had called her to the center of the mat for a demonstration, ostensibly to show a defensive technique against a larger opponent. What followed wasn't instruction, but humiliation. He had swept her legs with unnecessary force, sending her crashing to the mat with a thud that knocked the wind from her lungs. "Ladies like you belong in cardio kickboxing, not on these mats," he sneered, his black belt drawn tight around his waist. His students snickered, phones recording her humiliation. No one noticed her steady hands or the faded calluses as she quietly rose from the mat, her eyes briefly meeting his with unusual composure. A small military dog tag slipped from beneath her GI as she straightened it, drawing a few curious glances. "Some people should know their limits," Ryan announced to his class, but they had just mocked the wrong woman. The academy owner, Derek Calloway, had witnessed the entire exchange from the doorway of his office. A businessman first and a martial artist second, Derek had built Pinnacle into one of the most profitable academies in Boston. The walls of his office were covered with photos of him alongside famous fighters and celebrities who had trained at his facilities. He made no move to intervene, his expression calculating as he watched Jasmine bow respectfully despite the disrespect she'd been shown. Jasmine endured the remainder of the class in silence, executing each technique with mechanical precision while ignoring the sideways glances and whispered comments. When Ryan assigned partners for sparring, she found herself deliberately isolated. "Rhodes, you can sit this one out and observe. You might learn something," Ryan instructed, not bothering to hide his disdain. So she sat against the wall, watching as others trained, noting their movements, their strengths, their weaknesses. It wasn't the first time she'd been sidelined, and she doubted it would be the last. After class, as others filed out to the locker rooms, Ryan approached her. "The mats need cleaning. Since you're not using them properly anyway, you might as well make yourself useful." He tossed a spray bottle and towel at her feet before walking away. Jasmine waited until everyone had left before quietly completing the task. It wasn't the work that bothered her. She'd done far worse in the military, but the deliberate attempt to demean her. As she wiped down the last section of mat, she noticed Derek Calloway watching from the doorway of his office. "Jasmine, isn't it? Can I have a word?" he called out, gesturing for her to join him. Jasmine set aside the cleaning supplies and followed him into the office, standing at attention out of habit while he settled into the leather chair behind his desk. "I've been observing your progress," he began, steepling his fingers. "Ryan has expressed some concerns about your fit with our program." Jasmine remained expressionless, waiting for him to continue. "Pinnacle has a reputation to maintain. Our clients expect a certain level of excellence. We don't offer participation trophies here." He paused, clearly expecting some response, but Jasmine simply held his gaze. Derek sighed. "Look, We have women-only beginner classes on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I think you might be more comfortable there. It wasn't a suggestion, but a thinly veiled directive. With all due respect, sir, I've paid for the advanced class, Jasmine replied evenly. Derek's expression hardened slightly. Well, there's also the matter of your membership fee. We've had to implement some additional training requirements for advanced students. There'll be a supplementary charge of $60 per month. It was a transparent attempt to price her out, but Jasmine didn't flinch. I understand. Will that be included in next month's payment? Derek seemed slightly taken aback by her composure. Yes, and I'll need you to sign this waiver for our promotional materials. He slid a form across the desk. Jasmine glanced down at it, noting the clause that granted Pinnacle rights to use any videos or photos of her for marketing purposes, including, she suspected, the humiliating footage from today's class. She signed it without comment, her signature as controlled as her expression. The following week brought new levels of ostracism. Jasmine arrived at the academy to find printouts of screen captures from the video of her takedown pinned to the bulletin board, captioned with "technique gone wrong." Students she had previously trained with now avoided partnering with her during exercises. "We need someone who can actually contribute," one of the men said loudly when she approached his group during water breaks. Conversations would halt when she neared, only to resume in hushed tones once she passed. Her gym bag had been moved from its usual spot in the locker room and placed near the bathroom, a not-so-subtle message about her status in the hierarchy. Ryan had escalated his campaign of degradation, using her as the example of incorrect technique in every demonstration. "This is how beginners make mistakes," he would announce, forcing Jasmine to hold positions that strained her injured shoulder while he slowly explained everything she was doing wrong. When new potential members toured the facility, he would make a point of criticizing her in front of them. "Some people just can't grasp the fundamentals, no matter how much time they spend here," he told one prospect, loud enough for the entire class to hear. "But we welcome all levels, even if they never advance." Jasmine's treatment at Pinnacle soon spread beyond its walls. During an open mat session at a neighboring academy where practitioners from different schools could train together, she overheard whispers as she entered. "That's the woman from Pinnacle, the one who doesn't know her place." No one offered to partner with her, and when she finally approached someone, they made an excuse about needing to leave early. At a local coffee shop near the academy, she recognized two students from her class at the counter ahead of her. "Did you see that pathetic attempt at an armbar yesterday?" one said to the other, not realizing she was behind them. "Ryan says she's the perfect example of why some people should stick to yoga." They noticed her then and had the decency to look embarrassed, but neither apologized. The barista, who had witnessed the exchange, gave her an extra shot in her latte without charging her. "Don't let the meatheads get you down," she said quietly as she handed over the cup. It was a small kindness in what had become an increasingly hostile environment. The humiliation even spilled into Jasmine's personal life. Her ex-husband, Trevor, texted her after somehow seeing one of the videos that had made its way online. "This is why I couldn't stay. You never know when to quit," his message read. "Always trying to prove something instead of knowing your limitations." Jasmine had stared at the text for a long time before deleting it without response. At work, she noticed some of her colleagues giving her strange looks. One of her regular patients, a retired businessman recovering from knee surgery, requested a different therapist without explanation. Later, she overheard the receptionist mentioning that he'd seen that video and didn't feel comfortable with someone who showed such poor judgment. Even her landlord, who had spotted her practicing movements in the courtyard of their building one evening, made his disapproval clear. "Don't bring that violent stuff around here," he warned. "We've got families with kids in this building." The financial strain of the increased membership fees at Pinnacle was beginning to take its toll as well. Jasmine had started taking extra weekend shifts at the rehabilitation center and cut back on everything but the essentials to make the payments, determined not to be forced out by economic pressure. Despite everything, Jasmine continued to attend classes at Pinnacle with the same quiet determination that had characterized her military career. Each humiliation, each slight, Each deliberate exclusion was absorbed and filed away, fuel for the discipline that kept her returning. In the evenings, she would practice in her apartment, moving furniture aside to create enough space for solo drills. What no one at Pinnacle knew was that twice a week, Jasmine also trained at a community center in Roxbury with Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Washington, a former Marine combat instructor who had recognized her at the VA hospital where he received treatment for his own injuries. Washington had approached her after a therapy session, the familiar set of her shoulders and watchful eyes marking her as a fellow Marine, even in civilian clothes. "You're wasted here, Rhodes," he'd said bluntly. "You should be teaching, not just treating." When Jasmine explained her interest in Jiu-Jitsu, Washington had nodded approvingly. "Good choice. I've got a small group that meets at the community center. Nothing fancy, but it's real training with real respect. You should join us. Have you ever been underestimated because of your race or gender? Share your experience in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss these powerful stories of Black resilience in the face of adversity." Under Henry Washington's guidance, Jasmine had progressed far beyond the level she showed at Pinnacle, mastering techniques that Ryan was still struggling to execute properly. Washington understood the strategy behind her deliberate underperformance. "Sometimes the best advantage is being underestimated," he'd said during one of their sessions. "But remember, there comes a point when you have to show your true capabilities. The question is when and where you choose to do that." Their training sessions took place in a worn-down community center with faded mats and basic equipment, a stark contrast to Pinnacle's gleaming facilities. But there was something pure about the space, something honest. Here, there were no cameras, no social media posts, no performative excellence. Just the quiet thud of bodies on mats and the occasional grunt of exertion as Washington pushed Jasmine to her limits. "You're holding back," he observed during one particularly intense session. "Your shoulder bothering you?" Jasmine shook her head. "Old habits. At Pinnacle, I've gotten used to not showing everything I can do." Washington's weathered face creased in a frown. "I get it. But remember what your father used to say? Focus on the mission, not the noise," Jasmine replied, the words coming automatically. It was one of many lessons her father had instilled in her, a mantra that had carried her through the toughest moments of her military career. Staff Sergeant Robert Rhodes had been a Marine like his daughter after him, serving 20 years before retiring to teach high school history in their small Pennsylvania hometown. As the only Black family in a predominantly white neighborhood, he had prepared Jasmine early for the challenges she would face. "People will always have expectations of you based on what they see," he told her. "Your job isn't to meet their expectations. It's to exceed them when it serves your purpose and ignore them when it doesn't." Jasmine remembered a particular incident from her childhood that had shaped her approach to confrontation. She was 10 years old, the only Black girl in her 5th grade class, when a group of boys had surrounded her on the playground, taunting her with racist remarks. Instead of lashing out or running away, she had stood perfectly still, her face impassive, her gaze steady until a teacher finally noticed and intervened. Later, her father had nodded with approval when she recounted the story. "They wanted to see you break," he said. "You denied them that power. Sometimes silence is the strongest response." That lesson had served her well in the military, where as one of few Black women in her unit, she was constantly under scrutiny. Rather than trying to prove herself through aggression or bravado, Jasmine had let her performance speak for itself. She excelled in every aspect of training, particularly hand-to-hand combat, where her natural athleticism and analytical mind gave her an edge. By the time she was assigned as a combat instructor, her reputation was such that even the most skeptical recruits quickly learned to respect her abilities. The memory of her first day as an instructor was particularly vivid. A burly recruit had snickered when she was introduced, whispering something to his buddy that made them both laugh. Jasmine had called him forward for a demonstration, and within seconds, had him pinned in a submission hold, his face pressed against the mat as he frantically tapped out. The room had fallen silent. She never had discipline problems after that. Afghanistan had changed everything. The convoy attack had come without warning, an IED followed by small arms fire from multiple directions. Jasmine had been thrown from the vehicle, her right shoulder torn open by shrapnel. Despite her injury, she had managed to drag 2 wounded Marines to cover, applying tourniquets and returning fire until support arrived. The action had earned her a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star with V device for valor, but it had also ended her career. The damage to her shoulder required multiple surgeries, and though she regained most of her mobility, the medical board deemed her unfit for combat duty. The transition to civilian life had been harder than recovering from her physical wounds. Without the structure and purpose of the Marines, Jasmine had felt adrift. Her marriage, already strained by multiple deployments, couldn't withstand the additional pressure of her career loss and depression. Trevor had tried, in his way, but he couldn't understand why she couldn't just move on and be normal. The final straw came when she woke up screaming from a nightmare, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The look of fear in his eyes as he backed away from her was something she couldn't forget. Jiu-Jitsu had been part of her attempt to rebuild, to find a physical discipline that could help quiet her mind the way the Marines once had. Pinnacle hadn't been her first choice. It was expensive and clearly catered to a clientele that didn't include many people who looked like her. But it had the best technical reputation in Boston, and Jasmine had been drawn to the challenge, the chance to test herself against the best. The Boston Open is coming up next month, Washington said, interrupting her thoughts. You should compete. Jasmine hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea. Why not? You're more than ready. Pinnacle requires academy approval for registration. Ryan would never sign off. Washington's eyes gleamed with mischief. Let me worry about that. Just tell me you'll do it. Jasmine thought about it. The Boston Open Jiu-Jitsu tournament was a prestigious regional competition that attracted participants from across New England. Pinnacle always fielded a strong team, with Ryan himself competing in the black belt division where he typically placed in the top 5. The idea of showing what she could really do was tempting, but the potential backlash gave her pause. I'll think about it, she promised. The financial pressure was mounting. The increased membership fees at Pinnacle were stretching her budget to the breaking point, and the extra shifts at the rehabilitation center were taking a physical toll. The smart move would be to quit Pinnacle and train exclusively with Washington at the community center, but something in her refused to be driven out. There was a principle at stake, a line she wasn't willing to cross. If she left, it would be on her terms, not because she had been pushed out. One evening, as she was gathering her things after class at Pinnacle, she overheard Ryan talking to a group of his favorite students in the office. The door was ajar, and his voice carried clearly. The Boston Open is our chance to show what Pinnacle is made of, he was saying. I want everyone registered by the end of the week. We need to make a statement this year. A female voice, Alexa Palmer, one of the few women who trained regularly in the advanced class, asked, What about Rhodes? Is she competing? Ryan's laugh was dismissive. Please. She can barely handle basic drills. The last thing we need is her embarrassing us in front of the entire Boston Jiu-Jitsu community. I don't know, another voice said. She seems to pick things up pretty quickly. Trust me, Ryan replied. I know her type. All talk, no substance. The minute she faces real competition, she'll fold. Jasmine slipped away before they could realize she was listening, her decision made. The next day, she submitted her registration for the Boston Open through Washington, who had contacts in the tournament organization. She registered for the women's blue belt division despite still being officially ranked as a white belt at Pinnacle. Ryan had refused to promote her despite her clear technical proficiency, another way of keeping her in her place. When she submitted the paperwork through the academy as required, Ryan confronted her in front of the entire class. Rhodes, I saw your tournament registration. Are you trying to embarrass yourself in this academy? You're not ready for competition. Jasmine maintained her composure. I'd like the opportunity to test my skills, sir. Ryan's face reddened. Your skills? That's rich. Save yourself the embarrassment. I'm pulling your registration. But it was too late. The registration had already been processed, and Jasmine had paid the non-refundable fee. Tournament rules required academy approval for registration, but not for participation once registered. It was a technicality that infuriated Ryan, but one he couldn't circumvent. In the weeks leading up to the tournament, the atmosphere at Pinnacle grew even more hostile. Jasmine was completely excluded from the tournament preparation training, left to practice basic drills on her own while Ryan worked intensively with the rest of the team. Comments about her delusions of grandeur and setting herself up for humiliation followed her wherever she went in the academy. Even Derek Calloway pulled her aside to express his concerns about her decision to compete. "It's a reflection on all of us," he said, his tone conveying his displeasure. "If you're not adequately prepared, it affects Pinnacle's reputation." "I understand, sir," Jasmine replied, her face giving nothing away. "I'll do my best to represent the academy well." Meanwhile, her training with Washington intensified. They focused on perfecting her armbar technique, which had always been one of her strengths. "You're naturally gifted at this," Washington told her. "Your body proportions, your grip strength, the way you use leverage, it's textbook perfect." The morning of the tournament arrived with a spring chill in the air. Jasmine woke before dawn as usual, but instead of her typical routine, she sat on the edge of her bed and held her father's dog tags in her palm. Staff Sergeant Robert Rhodes had passed away from cancer 2 years before Jasmine's injury in Afghanistan, never seeing her difficult transition to civilian life. "Focus on the mission, not the noise," she whispered to herself, tucking the dog tags beneath her tournament GI before heading to the convention center where the competition was being held. The Pinnacle team had arranged to meet in the lobby, but when Jasmine arrived, she was greeted with cold stares and deliberate exclusion from the pre-competition huddle. Ryan was at the center, giving last-minute advice to his favored students while ignoring her presence completely. Alexa Palmer, the young woman who had asked about her at the meeting, smugly informed her that she should wait elsewhere. "This is for serious competitors only," she said with a smirk. "Ryan doesn't want you distracting the team." Jasmine nodded and moved away, finding a quiet corner to begin her warm-up routine. She ran through mobility exercises and breathing techniques, centering herself as she had been taught in the Marines. As she stretched, she observed the Pinnacle team, noting how Ryan focused all his attention on the male competitors, while giving only cursory advice to the 2 other women who would be competing. The tournament area was already filling with spectators and participants from dozens of academies across the region. On the far side of the hall, Jasmine spotted Master Gunnery Sergeant Washington arriving with his small group from the community center. He caught her eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, a gesture that meant more to her than any pep talk from Ryan could have. The women's blue belt division was scheduled for the early afternoon, giving Jasmine plenty of time to observe other matches and mentally prepare. She watched as the first Pinnacle competitors took to the mats with Ryan shouting instructions from the sidelines. Most performed well, advancing to the next rounds as expected from a prestigious academy. When Alexa competed in the women's purple belt division, Ryan was especially vocal, his attention fully engaged in a way it never was for Jasmine. Alexa won her first match handily, but lost in the semifinals, returning to the team area in tears. Ryan consoled her with an arm around her shoulders. "You were robbed," he insisted loud enough for the nearby referees to hear. That takedown was perfect. As the morning progressed, an announcement came over the loudspeaker that caused a stir throughout the venue. "Attention competitors in the men's black belt division. Due to a medical withdrawal, we have a slot available. According to tournament rules, the slot will be filled by the next eligible alternate. Would Jasmine Rhodes please report to the registration desk?" The Pinnacle team fell silent, all eyes turning to Jasmine in confusion. Ryan immediately stormed toward the officials' table, his face contorted with anger. Jasmine calmly gathered her bag and followed, maintaining a respectful distance as Ryan confronted the tournament director. "There must be some mistake," he insisted. "Jasmine Rhodes is a white belt from my academy. She can't possibly compete in the black belt division. Have you ever held back your true abilities to avoid drawing attention to yourself? Tell us about a time when you finally revealed your skills and surprised everyone." Don't forget to subscribe to receive more powerful narratives about overcoming adversity and breaking barriers. The tournament director, a stern woman in her 60s with decades of martial arts experience, consulted her computer. According to our records, Ms. Rhodes qualified as an alternate based on her submission for consideration in the expert division. Her credentials were validated by Master Gunnery Sergeant Henry Washington, a certified instructor with the appropriate ranking to sponsor a competitor. Ryan turned to Jasmine, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. What credentials? What is this fraud? Before Jasmine could respond, Master Sergeant Washington appeared beside her. No fraud, Bennett. Staff Sergeant Rhodes was one of the Marine Corps' top hand-to-hand combat instructors before her medical discharge, and she's more than qualified for this division. The revelation hit the gathering crowd like a thunderclap. Jasmine's fellow students from Pinnacle stared in shock as the pieces fell into place. The unusual composure under pressure, the quick mastery of techniques, the calloused hands and watchful eyes that spoke of experience beyond a civilian gym. Ryan struggled to regain control of the situation. This is ridiculous. She's never demonstrated black belt level skills in my academy. The tournament director's patience was wearing thin. Mr. Bennett, the verification has been completed according to tournament rules. Either Ms. Rhodes fills the slot, or we move to the next alternate. Those are the options. Ryan looked around desperately, noticing the attention their confrontation was attracting. Other competitors and spectators had gathered, drawn by the unusual situation. With no graceful way to object further without seeming petty, Ryan reluctantly backed down. Fine, let her embarrass herself, then. As he turned to walk away, the tournament director called after him. Actually, Mr. Bennett, according to the bracket adjustment, you'll be Ms. Rhodes' first opponent. Ryan froze mid-step, then slowly turned back, his expression now a mixture of shock and barely concealed panic. That can't be right. But it was, and everyone present knew it. The confrontation had drawn enough attention that changing the bracket now would raise questions about favoritism or manipulation. Ryan was trapped by his own outburst. News of the unusual pairing spread quickly through the tournament venue. By the time Jasmine and Ryan were called to their mat, a substantial crowd had gathered to witness what many expected to be either a quick humiliation or an interesting upset. Jasmine removed her warm-up jacket, revealing arms corded with lean muscle, usually hidden beneath her baggy work clothes. A small gasp went up from some of the Pinnacle students who had never seen this side of their supposedly untalented classmate. Ryan tried to maintain his confident demeanor as they bowed to each other and the referee, but the tightness around his eyes betrayed his anxiety. The whistle blew, signaling the start of the match. Ryan immediately moved forward aggressively, attempting to establish dominance with a strong collar grip. Jasmine remained defensive for the first few seconds, gauging his approach and timing. Then, with a fluidity that seemed almost casual, she executed a perfect sleeve drag, creating just enough space to slide into position for an armbar. The movement was so smooth, so technically precise that Ryan had no time to defend properly. Within 14 seconds of the starting whistle, Jasmine had isolated his arm and applied the submission hold with textbook perfection. The crowd fell silent as Ryan frantically tapped the mat, signaling his submission. The referee raised Jasmine's hand in victory as Ryan scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and anger. 14 seconds, someone in the crowd announced loudly, checking the official timer. She submitted him in 14 seconds. The murmurs grew as Ryan stormed off the mat without the customary handshake, shoving past his stunned teammates. Jasmine stood calmly at the center of the mat, bowing respectfully to the referee and the judges before turning to leave. Master Sergeant Washington approached, offering a rare smile and a firm handshake. Clean execution, Rhodes. Your father would be proud. At the mention of her father, Jasmine's composure wavered slightly. She touched the dog tags beneath her GI. Thank you, sir. As she walked back to her gear bag, she passed the Pinnacle team. Most averted their eyes, but Alexis stared openly, her previous smugness replaced by confusion and a dawning respect. The tournament continued with Jasmine advancing through subsequent rounds with the same quiet efficiency. She didn't win the division, Her semifinal opponent was a legitimate world-class competitor with years more experience. But her performance was remarkable enough that officials began reviewing footage of her earlier matches, including the 14-second submission of Ryan. What they saw raised serious questions about the culture and practices at Pinnacle Martial Arts Academy. By the end of the tournament, videos of Jasmine's matches had spread throughout the martial arts community. The contrast between her treatment at Pinnacle and her obvious skill level prompted outrage from many respected instructors. Tournament officials had received multiple reports about Ryan's behavior, both during the event and from students who came forward with stories of his bullying tactics at the academy. Derek Calloway, ever conscious of Pinnacle's reputation, quickly distanced himself from Ryan's actions. "We are conducting a thorough review of the situation," he announced to concerned members the following Monday. "Pinnacle is committed to creating a respectful training environment for all our students." Behind closed doors, however, his concern was purely financial. The negative publicity was already affecting membership inquiries, and several current members had threatened to cancel if action wasn't taken. Ryan was suspended from teaching, pending the investigation, a move that seemed designed more to protect the academy's image than address the underlying issues. When Jasmine arrived for class that evening, she found a noticeably subdued atmosphere. The students, who had previously mocked or avoided her, now seemed uncertain how to interact with her. Derek intercepted her before she could enter the training area. "Jasmine, could I speak with you privately?" In his office, he offered apologies that rang hollow given his previous complicity. "There's been a misunderstanding about your background and abilities. We value your membership and would like to make things right." What followed was a transparent attempt to co-opt her newfound reputation for the Academy's benefit. "We'd like to offer you a position as a women's self-defense instructor. Your military background would be an excellent marketing angle." His eyes gleamed with the prospect of the social media posts and press releases he could generate from her story. Jasmine declined the offer with the same quiet composure she had maintained throughout her time at Pinnacle. "I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Calloway, but I've accepted a position elsewhere." It wasn't entirely true yet, but it soon would be. The next day, Jasmine submitted her resignation from the academy, requesting a refund of her most recent membership payment. Derek didn't argue, eager to resolve the situation without further conflict that might generate more negative publicity. Over the following weeks, Jasmine continued her work at the Veterans Rehabilitation Center while developing a program that combined physical therapy with martial arts techniques specifically designed for trauma recovery. The director of the center, impressed by both her expertise and the positive response from veterans who had heard about her tournament performance, provided space and resources for evening classes twice a week. Word spread quickly, and soon Jasmine's program had a waiting list. Among her first students were two Black female veterans struggling with PTSD and the physical limitations of combat injuries. "You understand in a way others don't," one told her after a particularly challenging session. "It's not just about the techniques. It's about reclaiming control." Ryan attempted to salvage his reputation by challenging the tournament results, claiming that Jasmine had misrepresented her qualifications. His efforts backfired when a more thorough investigation revealed that he had systematically marginalized and bullied multiple students, particularly women and people of color, who threatened his perceived authority. Several former members came forward with similar stories, creating a pattern that couldn't be dismissed as isolated incidents. His suspension from teaching became permanent, and his black belt status was reviewed by the governing body. While they didn't revoke his rank, the public censure effectively ended his career as a respected instructor. One morning about a month after the tournament, Jasmine was getting coffee at her usual cafe when Ryan entered. The shop fell quiet as he spotted her at the counter. He approached, his expression a mixture of anger and wounded pride. "You made a fool of me," he said loud enough for others to hear. "You deliberately hid who you were." Jasmine met his gaze steadily. "I never lied about my background. You just never asked." She paid for her coffee and walked past him without further comment, refusing to engage in the public confrontation he clearly wanted. It was the last time they spoke. The Boston martial arts community gradually adjusted to Jasmine's presence. Some of the more progressive academies reached out with invitations to train or teach seminars, recognizing the value of her unique perspective and experience. Alexa Palmer, surprisingly, was among the first from Pinnacle to seek her out, arriving hesitantly at one of Jasmine's veterans classes. "I came to apologize," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "The things I said, the way I treated you, there's no excuse." Jasmine accepted the apology with grace. "We all make judgments based on limited information. What matters is being willing to reconsider when presented with new facts." Alexa asked if she could join the program as a volunteer, a request Jasmine granted with the condition that Alexa understand the special needs and boundaries of trauma survivors. It was the beginning of a productive mentoring relationship that eventually led Alexa to pursue studies in physical therapy herself. Even Derek Calloway attempted to repair the relationship, offering Jasmine a position as head instructor at a new Pinnacle location with complete autonomy over the curriculum and culture. She declined politely, but used the opportunity to advocate for structural changes in how the academy evaluated and treated students of all backgrounds and abilities. 6 months after the tournament, Jasmine's program had expanded to 3 locations across Boston with support from both the VA and private grants for community health initiatives. She maintained her full-time position at the rehabilitation center, but had reduced her hours slightly to accommodate the growing demand for her specialized training. Master Sergeant Washington served as her assistant instructor, his gruff demeanor and technical expertise complementing her more measured approach. Together, they created a curriculum that addressed both the physical and psychological aspects of recovery through martial arts. Jasmine kept her father's dog tags with her at all times, now openly worn over her GI during training sessions. They had become something of a trademark, a visual reminder of the heritage of discipline and service that informed her teaching. The signature armbar technique that had defeated Ryan was now jokingly referred to as the 14-second solution by her students, though Jasmine discouraged focusing on that aspect of her story. "The technique isn't special," she would explain during instruction. "It's the preparation, focus, and timing that make it effective. Those are skills anyone can develop with proper training." On the anniversary of her father's death, Jasmine visited his grave in Pennsylvania, placing a small stone on his headstone, as was her tradition. Beside it, she left a recent photograph of her with her students, many of them veterans like herself, who had found a path forward through the discipline and community of martial arts. "You were right, Dad," she said quietly to the granite marker. "The mission is what matters, not the noise." As she turned to leave, she noticed an elderly man watching from a respectful distance. He approached slowly, using a cane for support. "You're Robert Rhodes's daughter, aren't you?" he asked. "The one who's been teaching veterans in Boston." Jasmine nodded, curious about the stranger's connection to her father. "I'm William Townsend. Your father and I served together in Lebanon back before you were born. He saved my life during the barracks bombing." The man's eyes grew distant with memory. He never talked about it, never wanted recognition, just did what needed doing and moved on to the next mission. He focused on Jasmine again, a smile creasing his weathered face. "You remind me of him. Same quiet strength. He'd be mighty proud of what you're building." The unexpected encounter felt like a completion of a circle, a confirmation that the path she had chosen honored not just her father's memory, but the values he had lived by. Back in Boston, Jasmine continued to build her program, focusing on those who needed it most rather than those who could pay the most. Her approach attracted attention from military and civilian organizations alike, resulting in invitations to develop similar programs across the country. The 14 seconds that had changed the trajectory of her life were now just a footnote in a larger story of service and transformation. When new students asked about the infamous tournament match, she would acknowledge it briefly before redirecting their attention to the fundamentals they needed to master. "Respect, discipline, and perseverance," she would tell them. "Those are the foundations. The techniques are just tools." Her program became known not just for technical excellence, but for its inclusivity. Unlike the elite academies that catered primarily to wealthy clients, Jasmine's classes welcome people of all backgrounds, with special attention to creating a space where Black women and other marginalized groups could train without the pressure of being the only one in the room. The dog tags that had slipped from beneath her GI during that first humiliating encounter at Pinnacle now represented not just her father's legacy, but her own emerging one. A reminder that true strength often lies hidden beneath unassuming exteriors, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The story of the Black woman who was mocked at Jiu-Jitsu class only to silence everyone 14 seconds later became something of a legend in Boston martial arts circles. But for Jasmine, the vindication of that moment was less important than what came after. The community she built, the lives she touched, the barriers she broke down not just for herself, but for others who would follow. Some people mistake kindness for weakness and silence for acceptance. But as Jasmine showed us, true strength isn't about dominating others. It's about knowing your worth when no one else does. In a world that too often judges Black women before giving them a chance to prove themselves, her story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful response to prejudice is excellence. If Jasmine's journey moved you, hit that like button and subscribe right now to support more Black stories of triumph against adversity. The Black Struggle Stories is dedicated to amplifying voices that society tries to silence. What challenge are you facing today that requires this kind of quiet courage? Share in the comments below, and remember, like Jasmine's father taught her, focus on the mission, not the noise.